tampered with.
So we want to prevent those keys that were in that device that was tampered with from being used in the system. And the way we do that is we generate new key management blocks that have those explosions.
Are you talking about a physical key that goes on the back of the computer, for instance? Or are you talking about a key that you enter during installation?
No, the device keys would be basically burnt into the firmware.
The firmware manufacturer.
Yeah.
Okay, the firmware of the
Device. So for example, if you go and you buy a DVD audio player, say a Panasonic DVD audio player, you buy another one from a different brand or even from the same brand and the same model, they're going to have different keys.
It's like the original Ethernet card number that was going to be unique for every card.
Right, like the MAC address. So did I address your question?
All right.
I think what you're talking about was that it starts off with the initial set, the revocation list can only grow larger, and next year Hollywood figures out that Winamp or this client got busted, and they don't want those devices to see next year's movie. So next year, in the movie, somewhere there's a KMB that comes in that updates. When you go and put it in your DVD player, it updates, and it finds out, oh, you got that Panasonic that was broken or corrupted, what do you call it? So we're going to revoke that. So you go to play it, and now you can't play it.
So
and then you go take your old
media in that case transmits the new KMB.
Yeah.
So
you go buy a $10,000 stereo system, you go buy a new CD, you open it and the whole thing shuts down.
Yeah.
Well,
That's the nightmare scenario.
it probably wouldn't shut down. It probably would not be able to play that particular piece of content. And unless there was a mistake, the only reason that happened is because instead of paying $10,000, you paid $10.
How can you get universal coverage on your revocation unless the KMB is universal?
How can you get?
Universal coverage on your revocation unless the KMBs are universal.
Well, the KMBs are universal in the sense that they all come from the same source.
Right?
But they can all be different because the KMB does two things, right? It has an encryption of KM multiple times, and implicitly it has an encoding of this revocation list, which is the positions where we want the explosions. So,
So that part of it has to be consistent across all KMBs.
right, but different KMBs that are issued at different times will have different lists, right?
Right.
So if you have a really old KMB, for example, you created your cluster and you never allowed any new content into the cluster, then you may have a really old KMB, whereas my cluster, because it's always updating, it may have a much more up-to-date KMB than yours.
Oh, you're saying it actually replaces the KMB? Or
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because if it replaced it, then
well,
what would be the criteria for, how do you know that this is a better KMB than what you already have?
Well, let me ask you this. What would happen if you had older media that didn't have the same new level of KMBs on it?
Right.
What if someone distributed old media that didn't contain the newer?
Well, it depends on what you're doing with the media, right? If what you expect is that when you insert the media, you just play it, then it's okay, because, like we said, there's nothing we can do about things that were issued in the past. So that piece of media, the KMB that it has, right, doesn't prevent your devices from playing. But you don't want to adopt it as the new KMB because it has a smaller revocation list than the one you have in the more up-to-date KMB that you already have in your system. So you could still be able to play back that media, Now, the way I think about media is more as a transmission mechanism. That's how the media enters the home. But what you may want to do is to save it onto your hard drive, for example. So at that point, you're kind of rebinding the content to the clusters notion of what the binding key is. So you're basically re-encrypting the key. And now the old media, you're not really using it on a daily basis. You just have the content.
But there's no way to stop somebody once they, for instance, they play something, they transport that stream to a new place and record it. You can't. There's nothing you can do about that.
Right. What you can do is because all devices are compliant, they will never, for example, place unencrypted content on the network. And if your device, again, because it's compliant, when you decrypt, you never make an extra copy unless it's explicitly allowed, and you always want to keep it protected.
How can you prevent that? I can play a DVD on my laptop. How can you prevent me from figuring out the software, adding my few lines of Perl or whatever to get in there and making that copy?
Well, there are tamper resistance techniques that can be used, both software and hardware.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, the same could be said of a DVD player. It's just going to be more of a hardware hack than a software hack. But, the data is going on the bus from, this chip to this other chip.
Yeah.
How effective is software tamper resistance as it stands right now? I read a paper about it, and they said most of what exists right now is not all that effective.
Right.
Where's that at?
Here's my experience with that. Was back in the early 80s, we had copy protected software. And every time there was a new copy protection scheme, 6 months later, there was a new scheme to break it until it finally went away. And I tried to protect some software and invested in buying these disks published by ProLock that had, each disk had its own separate flaw on it, and you use the flaw, they put use laser light to put a hole in the disk, and each copy was installed specially to that disk with its flaw, and I had it all protected and I invested in getting my software all protected, and then, eventually there was a copy protection scheme that just somehow made an unprotected copy of it. And it was back and forth went on for a couple of years where somebody would come out with a new copy protection scheme, and 6 months later somebody else would defeat it, and then finally copy protection just went away.
They probably did. They probably went in and found where you authorized to look for the hole. They probably set a flag to bypass the look.
No, I think it waited till it was in memory in such a way that it was ready to execute after everything had been decrypted and was just ready to execute after all that, and then copied that to a file.
Oh, they flash copied the memory to somewhere else, or?
That's what I assume happened, but I know it made me, and it was able to execute the program to the point where it was no longer copy protected, and then made a file, and it seems to me like somebody's going to be able to do this with your music. It's got to eventually be decrypted to play it.
Eventually it'll die.
So a couple of things. So you used to be a content owner, right? Is that?
That's basically some program I was trying to publish, and I wanted copy protection. Yes. Okay. I'm a content owner.
So you were basically a customer of one of these content protection schemes, and that particular scheme, in the end, didn't work out for you. And one of the reasons was because somebody figured out how to get around it. That's why I was highlighting the fact that we start with that assumption. We start designing our system with the assumption that somebody will figure it out. The question is, what do you do then? Do you run desperately, or do you have a built-in mechanism in the system to recover from that? So that's why there's all this, update renewability notion. Now, somebody was asking about
okay,
software tamper resistance.
He makes a copy of your program and then sells that without, and you don't even know who it was that made it, that did that, and you can take the software to another machine anyway.
Right. So, okay. So somebody asked a similar question a while back and said, okay, the content, somebody hacks a device and now they rip the content and they post it. And I said, well, the solution to that is watermarking. Now, watermarking is really, one piece of the puzzle. What you can do with watermarking is you can, for example, detect that particular piece of content can only exist legally as protected content if the watermark bit is on. So if you decrypt the content and make it available, now I could go and say, okay, I download the content, it's on Nutella, I download it, and I check, is the watermark on? Yes. Is it protected? No. Then this is an illegal copy. Now, what can you do with that information? Two things. One, you can require all compliant devices to not play that kind of content. So now you reduce the space, the usability of this. Now everyone needs to have a hacked device. That's one thing. And the other thing you can do is you can actually be more intelligent and you can add information in the watermark that would allow you to trace back to the original device that made the illegal copy. So the forensics tools I was referring to, some work on the devices, some work on the content. So those are some of the techniques.
So, sorry.
There was a question in the queue that I haven't had a chance to answer about software tamper resistance.
I was curious, how good is it and how good do you see it becoming?
I think what it does is it makes it a lot more complicated to access content. It's no longer trivial. Really, when we look at software tamper resistance, we usually consider different levels of attack. So there's the casual script kidding that we want to exclude. There's the hacker who's intrigued. And then there's the professional attacker who has all sorts of tools. And at the very extreme, even for hardware, you have the people who shave off the layers of silicon and do stuff like that. So ultimately, somebody will be able to break into it. The question is, can you make it so that only very determined people who have lots of resources can do it?
So what level are you at? To give an example, it's an otherwise untrusted machine. Right. It's a competent software guy. He's not hacking into hardware, but he's running your software in the debugger.
Right.
And he's looking at the contents of the registers.
So one of the tamper resistance tools is anti-debugging. So if you detect that it's running in a debugging, you make sure that your secrets are nowhere to be found, for example. So, but it's kind of a race, right?
It's always a race.
There's measures, countermeasures, and countermeasures.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes,
I read the article from SiliconValley.com. He said IBM last month or this year invested $10 billion to